the Cloudflare CEO, announced in June AI bots overtook humans for traffic on the internet now, where bots make up 57% of all HTTP requests. It's pretty insane, right? So it's like over half of the internet now is just bots.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Attention Shift podcast. I'm Ed Abbis and this is Andy Marston, and we are back from our summer holiday break. Bit of warm weather training in Italy for me. I don't recommend going around cities in Italy in August. Andy, did you have a good break?
Yeah, lovely break. I think you followed me out to Italy. But yeah, nice
cool,
break.
Right.
Tottenham ruined the break for me, but other than that...
Yeah, and similarly Burnley ruined my break yesterday at West Brom, but let's not dwell on that. Right, let's dive straight in. So there's a lot happened over the last couple of weeks while we've been away. So first story, Disney Plus are now challenging Netflix on who owns the sports conversation. So straight after the rest is football expanded their deal with Netflix, we've now seen Disney Plus go for the Overlap network. So if anyone doesn't already know, Gary Neville's Overlap have signed a distribution deal with Disney Plus. That puts Disney Plus in direct competition with Netflix Arrested Football. The deal includes 40 episodes of Stick to Football with Neville, Carragher, Wright, Keane, Jill Scott, but also a new spin-off, Stick to United, which is co-hosted by Wayne Rooney and creator Mark Goldbridge. As everyone will probably know, Goldbridge runs United Stand, which is the largest Man United fan channel on YouTube. So it's interesting that this is the first time a single club fan channel has been licensed in this kind of way to Disney+. So I don't think they are buying necessarily football coverage here, but they are trying to buy into single fan bases' loyalties. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, I think this is something that it was going to be interesting what was going to happen with Goldbridge, obviously, when he went on board with Overlap. And I think this is for the first signs of some change that we're seeing.
Yeah, I think as well it's interesting that the deal's non-exclusive, right? So everything will still be on YouTube, everything that goes onto Disney Plus.
Yeah, the Overlap made a point of saying we want to stay in our spiritual home as well, which is different to what the rest of football are doing as well, because obviously they have come off YouTube with what they're doing with Netflix as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which I think's to the point, right? You're able to tap into different audiences. So I guess the calculation that they're making is that the audiences don't necessarily cannibalize each other all that much, and that the people that are hanging out on Disney Plus looking for stuff to watch aren't necessarily the same people that are browsing YouTube and treating it like TV.
Do you think this is a signal that these fan-led shows across all Premier League clubs and also obviously bigger clubs around the world as well are starting to have this transition now to become... Look, we know that they've been mainstream for a while, right? But I think sort of in media circles, they probably didn't see them as mainstream. But clearly, we're starting to see this crossover now, right?
Yeah, I mean, so Sky Sports have had like YouTubers kind of built into their programming for like a couple of years now, right? So I don't think it's anything entirely new. We've talked about it before on the podcast. Like, I think podcasts are just really cheap programming for streamers and TV channels to take up, and it just allows them to have more stuff available. And like we saw it with Netflix taking some YouTube content and starting to publish it on Netflix as well, like not just in sport, but like I think they did a deal with a creator outside of sport specifically, where he went and put his content onto Netflix. So I think it's just the way of them adding additional programming. Don't need to buy the rights. Man U obviously has a lot of interest around it as a club. There's a big fan base, so you know that there will be people that want to watch. And I think to your point around Goldbridge getting kind of access to talent by being part of the Overlap, I think it's interesting. Like obviously having Wayne Rooney there gives you a lot more credibility as kind of from a football perspective. And then you've also got Goldbridge bringing his audience, right? So you're kind of getting the best of both sides.
Yeah, I think it's pretty unique as well. I think probably lots of people will have assumed, like me included, that if something like Stick to United did rear its head, that it probably would have been Mark with Gary Neville, because I think they'd had plenty of banter down the years. And I know, look, for a fact as well, that Mark, has the audience that he's got and has the credibility with that audience, and for a long period of time was probably waiting to see how he could do that transition. But I think to go and get Wayne Rooney, who I think has managed to over the last sort of year or so, obviously he seems to have stepped away from football management and coaching, and I'm sure he'll never say never, but he's definitely gone for it 100% with the punditry. I'm not sure many people saw that coming, and I did. I remember when I watched the promo for it as well. It was quite amusing. It's going to be interesting to see how much they agree, but more importantly, how much they disagree over the course of the season. Because I bet you this week's episode is going to be interesting on the back of United's performance at the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I think using Rooney makes sense in a lot of ways because I guess Neville already commands his own pretty large audience, whereas Rooney's obviously got the credibility, but not necessarily like the same following from people going to listen specifically to his insights. So like if Neville's only got X amount of time in the day, it makes sense to not double him up on this show. Like he's already got so many other shows and media commitments. So I think it makes a lot of sense. In terms of to the second point, and obviously like we mentioned at the start of the show about Tottenham and Burnley respectfully ruining our weekends. But I think that's where fan content comes into its own right. Official publishers, official team accounts find it difficult to criticize when things are going badly, but fans want to lean into that, and they want justification for the way they're feeling, and so that's where like fan content has really like come into its own over the last decade, and that's where I think this kind of content kind of probably benefits the most from is like when it's stuff that the official accounts can't say. So yeah, they probably, have timed it well with the start of the Premier League season. Either way, there's going to be lots to talk about from a transfer perspective, from a predictions perspective. But losing away to Hull opening day of the season probably gives them an extra thing to talk about. But I think what's nice is I've seen a few clips, and you also get to understand Rooney's perspective both as a player but also as a manager and what his mindset would have been going into it. So you do get some sort of level of credibility around like mentality, as well as just it's not purely just rage bait, which I think is nice.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that relationship develops as well, and also from the overlaps perspective, obviously gone and done what they've gone with Stick to United. Clearly now there's a plan there, and the wider global group as well. You can see other Stick Twos starting to rear their head. They've clearly gone down that path, and it ends up being from a media and advertising perspective, it is something that you can package for brands. To access a certain kind of audience. You can definitely see the way they go in there. And they're getting it from the Disney Plus perspective, but also getting it from the YouTube and a wider media cell perspective as well. So I'd imagine we'll start to see more of those. Cool. All right, then let's move on to the next story. And so YouTube have announced that they're a major update to their platform, and it's essentially mainly around what makes video success on the platform. So they have decided on the 24th of August that they're going to change how it counts views. And this is bringing it in line with lots of other social media and video platforms too. So a view still needs to be a real person to press play, but it no longer passes any minimum watch duration. So average view duration, average percentage viewed remains unchanged. Now, it narrows the gap between views and playing impressions. And any before or after view count comparisons are going to become a little bit meaningless if you cannot work out how to do the adjustments. But importantly, what they have said as well is it's like you're not going to make any more money just because you're doing more views. This is because they are still going to be looking at engaged views as the way that you monetize your audience. But what do you think they're trying to do with this?
I don't know. I'd probably flip that question back to you. I think it's probably just a vanity metric thing, no?
Yeah. I think that's the point. Yeah, I was going to be. Look, I think there's an element of trying to standardise how everyone else was counting views anyway, and they feel like they were being held probably to a higher authority, and why should they? I think, like I said, the point that they've made there, that actually you're only going to get paid out anyway on engaged views, not on these views. So, yeah, lots and lots of people are going to be able to tell whoever they're working with, oh, yeah, we're doing way more views than we were doing before now, and these are real views now, and there's going to be this argument around, well, were they not real views before? But I think, yeah, it just drives that vanity metric, which for some people in the world really, really matters.
Yeah, it matters, but I think it's also like something to grapple with in terms of like quality over quantity, right? And like when you're trying to understand audiences, like I think that's something where, like from a personal perspective, when I put podcasts up on YouTube, it's always a little bit of a difficult one because it's like not all listeners or watchers are created equal, right? Some have much greater decision-making authority, and therefore, actually, for specific creators, you can kind of get drawn into a rat race if you start to chase just the number of views on a video, and you start to become more clickbaity in the way that you headline things, and you start to become maybe more more divisive, I guess, in like the side of the argument that you take versus like nuance and measured responses. So I think like in general, it kind of bothers me when people overly index on like number of views versus like creating stuff for the sake of trying to put out good content and get across like good opinion. And then there's another story that I wanted to get your opinion on that kind of attaches onto this quite well. And it's about a month old, but I came across it while we were on the holiday break, which is basically that the Cloudflare CEO announced in June AI bots overtook humans for traffic on the internet. Crossed over the threshold now, where bots make up 57% of all HTTP requests to HTML content versus humans at 42.75%, which is pretty insane, right? So it's like over half. Now it's just bots.
And I think I was going to come into the point you were making earlier. I know that when I look at viewing statistics across any of the clients that we work with, look, right, you'll need a volume of impressions and views to ultimately achieve what you want to achieve, but it's the last thing I look at. I'm looking at click-through rates, I'm looking at average watch times. Are those things going up? Are they increasing? Those are the things that I'm really bothered about. I'm looking at where am I seeing dips in audience viewing, how long am I retaining that audience for? And I think the same would apply here from a Cloudflare perspective, right? Like, look, yes, fine, in your case, you've got tens of millions of people coming to your website, but ultimately, what is the goal of your website digital platform? Ultimately, I imagine it's going to be about conversion in some way, shape, or form. It's going to be about dwell time. What I don't know is on those AI bots, as much as it's effectively faking views, is it also faking things like dwell times as well? Can't fake click-through. Can't fake click-through rates, right? Well, maybe it can even do that, right? But actual conversion, an actual human reaching out to you saying, I want some of what you are selling, is difficult to fake. But even with some of those things, I've seen it as well, where we've had inbounds, right? And you follow up on the inbound and you get no response. And then I sit there thinking to myself, was that even a real inbound? And the reality is you've got to question everything, and so it's not surprising, but I guess it is sad, and you've got to take then with a pinch of salt what your numbers are and probably go, well, it's probably half of that in reality.
Yeah, and you also get people that will essentially create content, and I mean the podcast that got acquired by OpenAI, the TBPN show, was a good example of this, where essentially like the live streams were created to create the clips, and actually it was a clip. It was basically just a clip farming exercise, right? Like it was create a 3-hour show, but then we're going to create 30 clips out of this that we're going to push across social channels. And actually, like the live streams might only be a couple thousand, but we've been acquired for 100 million because we're getting a ton of impressions across all the social platforms, whether it's X, whether it's Instagram, whether it's YouTube Shorts, because we're just constantly posting. So yeah, I think it's, as far as, I guess, takeaways, it's like worthwhile, I guess, understanding that the view count has changed so that you don't get duped by your agency telling you that you suddenly got a load more views. But then it's also probably worth like sort of introspectively asking yourself, like, what are the views for? And like, what are you actually hoping to achieve from the views?
You've got to be driving some kind of conversion, whatever your metric is, wherever you want to convert that audience to or for, becomes more important than ever for me. Like I said, we agonise over that as a B2B business internal in terms of like I never get bogged down about view metrics because I'm always thinking about but what did it actually mean? Because if that view time is going down, or if those click-through rates are less than they were before, I feel like we failed. So I'm always looking, I want to see those kind of metrics going up. But it always comes back to, you need a critical mass of audience to be able to then do all of those things too. So I'd be interested to see now how that does impact all of those conversion metrics. That's the thing I'm keeping my eye on. Cool. All right, then. Next story. So TikTok is becoming, for the NBA and WNBA, as they're terming it, an owned monetisation layer, not just their highlights reel. So they are they're now becoming probably one of the best examples of sports leagues who are using social media in the right manner. So TikTok has signed a multi-year global partnership with the NBA and WNBA, and they're combining highlight distribution, creator event access, TikTok game plan, discovery, and Pulse Premier ad inventory. They've got 30 million combined TikTok followers. NBA interest up 30%, WNBA interest up 50% since the start of 2026. So it's actually a pretty big climb that in a relatively short space of time. And 64% of women's basketball fans cite TikTok as their primary source for league updates. I know on some of the clients we work with, right, when we look at the audience, it's still male skewed. So the fact that they're getting such a high female skew is really, really interesting, because I often always see in every metric male skew on some of those platforms. So during the NBA finals, Game Plan drove 497 million impressions, of which 426,000 direct referrals to watch the game. So, you can work out the conversion rate if you're any good at maths there. How can more sports properties change their approach to social media to focus on business outcomes rather than reach? So it follows on from the story and the conversation we've just been having, really. Because views are vanity, right? Ultimately, we want to convert, and they are suggesting that they are doing and using TikTok to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm an expert on TikTok specifically as a platform, so I don't quite know what that monetization looks like. But I know that all the social platforms are trying to add in kind of more layers, whether it's shopping, whether it's like being able to tag products, etc., etc. So yeah. I would imagine that does change things slightly. I also think that like the distinction between the NBA and the WNBA is important, because they're in slightly different stages. I know the WNBA has existed for quite a while, but I think you could still arguably call it a challenger league.
It's been through a bit of a lumpy period of time, hasn't it, where it's had to sort of reboot itself, and so yeah.
And I would say it's having a resurgence because of people like Sophie Cunningham and Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese. Yeah. And there's a bit of narrative there, and there's a bit of rivalry there, and there's like some more sharp edges, I guess, to it, like where you've got kind of conflict between certain players, which I think is actually really positive for the league in terms of like having those rivalries and then the narrative that you can build around that. Like you suddenly start to follow it a bit more closely. And I think it's kind of a case of, if you are a challenger league and you're trying to build out your audiences, then you need to be where the audiences are. And specifically to the point around female audiences, if a lot of women are on TikTok and a lot of women are creating content on TikTok, then you need to be present on the platforms where the women are. You can't just expect them to suddenly be tuning in to ESPN and watching a full WNBA game if that's not how they've ever really behaved in the past. So I think it makes a lot of sense, particularly for the WNBA and for any challenger league. And obviously it still makes sense for the NBA, but probably to a slightly lesser extent, because I would say the familiarity of the NBA is already pretty high. But maybe there are markets around the world where TikTok has big audiences, like Europe, for example. I know the NBA cares a lot about Europe right now, obviously in Asia, and then the Middle East, like TikTok's also massive. So I can imagine for like non-US markets, like TikTok's probably great from a sort of global visibility and awareness perspective.
Yeah, and I was going to give them some credit as well for not only measuring the fact that how many direct referrals did they have, but actually putting it out there as well so we can see ourselves. And when you look at it, right, I mean, unless my maths is terrible, it's about 1%, right, the referral rate. I do take issue with them calling it, though, the owned monetized layer, because the reality is it's a contradiction. They don't own any of it. It's owned by TikTok. They're just borrowing it. They're just renting it for the period of time they're there. And if TikTok suddenly decide to change something, which, as we know, a lot of the platforms do, they've got to start all over again in terms of how they're doing things. Now, you'd probably imagine at that kind of scale, TikTok are speaking to the likes of the NBA, WNBA, saying, we are going to make some of these changes. This is how they're going to impact you. So they're giving them a heads up to do it as well. But as we saw when TikTok got switched off a while ago, when there's a lot of political flux, that suddenly goes off and everything you built there is not yours anymore. So look, they are trying to drive direct referrals, and that's the main thing, but they don't own that layer. Yeah,
I guess it depends what's in the contract, right? Because it said, like, they've gone and signed a global distribution deal with TikTok. They're not just adopting the platform aggressively on their own. So if there is maybe there is, when you have that much kind of brand value and you can negotiate a specific deal, maybe there are ways to get slightly more access than a typical creator would have in order to broadcast. But I haven't seen any statistics specifically around that. But like maybe there are ways for them to own it in a slightly more direct way than like somebody that's just going hard on a TikTok strategy would have.
Yeah, I know they've been good for a number of years in terms of engaging directly with the sports rights holders. So I imagine they're continuing to do that. I think you don't get a sense of, and look, YouTube's been the same as well, right, themselves. I think in the past where it was a bit more competitive, now they've realised now that they are vessels in themselves in a lot of ways, and their job is to facilitate, because the reality is if they just facilitate letting these people do what they want within the realms of what's controllable, people feel more inclined to do it rather than being told what they can and can't do. And they've all wised up as well that to not go in and necessarily be doing multi-million-dollar deals when they don't really need to, because what they have got, the one thing everyone wants is access to audience. That's the main thing. All right, cool. Next story. So, World One League have launched Microsports. So it's a vertical, purpose-built sports engineered to finish inside 30 seconds. I'm pretty new to this still, so I'm still reading into this a little bit. But they've launched 3 formats. And what we'll do is we'll put a link in the show notes after this as well, so people go and read about this and see for themselves. But 3 formats. The fastest, which is a 10-yard speed chamber sprint. The strongest, which is a combined bench press and squat total. And the toughest, which is takedown only fight. So this is something that's been founded by BattleBots veteran Nate Thomas and CEO Brett Morris. It's backed by 10 Olympic medalists for athlete credibility. And they've got a monetisation plan around advertising, sponsorship and licensing. So competitors range from Olympic medalists to complete unknowns in this. So they're really trying to mix it up and have a combination of elite athletes, but also creators, right? So interestingly, they're trying to build something then and then retrofit it back to the audience, whereas more people try and go to the audience first and then build on it. So this flips that usual model. What chance has it got to actually function and be a success, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that depends on a number of factors in terms of how much they've raised and what success has to look like in order for it to be.
How long can they stay in the game, I guess, yeah.
I guess for some of it, though, I think like working backwards and sort of retrofitting something to the modern day consumption habits is interesting in terms of like most sports are obviously very old, and so the way that they have been designed doesn't necessarily fit like modern consumption habits, and so you're having to compromise a lot in terms of what your product looks like. And so I think like the 2 insights that are interesting to me, one is you're building backwards from the consumption or behavior rather than trying to create a behavior in people based on a legacy model or a legacy format. And then the second part of it is that particularly the strongest and the fastest part, I think like are very objective measurements. And I think that that's interesting because everyone can measure themselves against it. And also like there isn't a bigger flex than being able to say that you're the fastest in the world or strongest in the world.
Well, I saw a Chinese robot at the weekend being the fastest in the world now, apparently.
Maybe that's the next iteration is you have your athletes, you have your creators, and you have your robots. Like it could be the third layer. But no, I think I'm really bullish on the fastest bit, because I think like I've seen quite a lot of clips around the athletics, like because you had the Commonwealth Games, then basically straight into the championships in Birmingham,
and down so, league in between, or just afterwards, was it in between?
Just after. So there was just like loads of athletics clips, and I think if you do look at like any moments like the Commonwealth Games or the Olympics, everyone cares about who's the fastest, and so I do think there is like an innate human curiosity in that. But I haven't got enough insight into exactly what the monetization model looks like, and so I think where a lot of challenger leagues have struggled is they've had to promise a lot to get the athletes on board. I wouldn't say that these sports are ones where the athletes aren't incredibly well paid currently, and so there probably is a little bit of an easier opportunity to get them on board. Specifically over 10 meters, right? Because I think the people that like the best paid sprinters will be the 100-meter champions, and the 100-meter champion isn't necessarily going to be the fastest over 10 meters, right? Like think about someone like Usain Bolt. He was often behind for the first 70% of the race, and then as everyone else is slowing down, he was just able to keep his speed at a faster rate, so he'd overtake them kind of nearer the line. So I don't know if they'll have to pay out a lot to the athletes to begin with. It could just be a promise that they're going to make them famous on social, and then actually the monetization for the athletes happens through their own channels and through their own fame, having the title and like having the IP. So actually the value's all in the IP of being able to say like you're world one champion or you're the world's fastest, and you have a verification, a bit like a Forbes list. Like it's almost like you just want the badge. That's what that's what I think they need to create from it. But what do you think about it?
Yeah, I think it was interesting. Like from what I've read about it as well, there wasn't a great deal of talk about there was lots of I saw lots of talk about advertising, sponsorship, licensing, all the commercial opportunities that come with it, but not a great deal of talk about if this is something that people are actually asking for. Are these questions that your public is actually posing? Who is the fastest over 10 meters, or who is can lift the most of this? Like, is it going to resonate enough? And I think they've got to have a bit of a plan around. Like I say, because they are not the marquee events. How are they going to interlink in and around when other things are happening? So they end up getting in that conversation around the content that people are looking for. Like I said, we've just had that period where there's been so much athletics going on. I've probably watched more than I've watched in ages. And interestingly, though, I didn't see a great deal of the Commonwealth Games, because certainly in the UK, of the deal that got done, I feel like that's the thing I saw the least of. I saw a lot of the European Championships and a lot of the Diamond League, but didn't see that. So it just goes to show, if you don't get your distribution model right, it's dead in the water. And the distribution model for me is going to have to be where people are consuming the content, the kind of content they're looking for. Like I said, I did see a lot about. It was interesting actually. I did see a lot about the weekend about obviously what was going on in China with the robot games, and interestingly, like everyone, I think the media were jumping on the fact that this robot beat Usain Bolt's world record, but lots of people in China were saying, I'll be a little bit disappointed if a robot wasn't beating Usain Bolt, right? Isn't that what we're building? Like, surely if we're building it to do that, it should be able to do that.
Yeah. I think to that point, though, like the robot thing is a good example, right? Because you say, are Joe Public asking for it? I think there's a different thing between asking for it and like what gets served up and you end up watching, right? Because I bet you weren't asking for like, I would love it if my algorithm just got taken over by like robots racing. But like the fact that you then watched it kind of qualifies it as worthwhile, right? So ultimately, I guess what they're saying is, if we put this stuff into the atmosphere of social media, we think that there'll be high retention and a lot of people will want to watch it and be curious and keep watching. And they've also designed it in a way where like the content's very short. I think what will be interesting is what comes out the back of it, because I think it's all good having the clips, but then you need somewhere to take people beyond that. So like if you keep watching someone win the 10-meter sprints, there needs to be somewhere for you to evolve to where you can watch a longer form YouTube video that tells you more about their story and more about their personality, because
that conversion
all you have is 10-second clips and you never have any other product, then I think you'll struggle. And I think that's where like stuff like the United Stand or these fan content things work, is that they provide all of the shoulder programming, right? So I guess I would say the success for this is whether people start creating shoulder content around it because they're curious about it, or whether it only ever lives on as 30-second clips and people watch it and immediately scroll, and then never re-engage with the characters or with the IP.
I agree. I just don't think there'll be enough. Yeah, you're right.
Because I don't think they're going to have crowds, but then I think that allows them to keep the costs pretty low, right? So like where the challenge has been for a lot of challenger leagues is you need stadia, you need to get fans into the stadium, like you need to sell tickets, you need to sell merch. Like if to begin with they can keep everything digital, they can probably film this in a one-off location that doesn't ever have to move, right? And it doesn't need to be particularly big. It just needs to have like a state-of-the-art sprint chamber and a bench press essentially, and maybe some mats if you've got the MMA part, like the takedown part. So it wouldn't necessarily require a particularly big studio. So it could be
very true.
And could actually end up like with a lot of other leagues then saying like, how do we do our version of this? I guess that's the secondary part, is like, if this works, does World Athletics just copy it? because I guess that's the one bit that will be the hardest, is how do you make it so that your IP, World One, is the credible thing that everyone's like, if you have that title, then you are genuinely the fastest in the world.
Yeah. Or do actually they set it up for all like I said, the traditional governing bodies to actually steal that from them and actually just factor it into whatever they're doing anyway when they've got all these people as a critical mass in one place anyway for a major event.
Yeah, like if you've got Tennis Australia doing the 1 point slam before a tennis tournament, could you have the 10-meter dash like 2 days after the main event or whatever, where the athletes go head to head to see who's fastest over 10 meters? So yeah, I think that's where it'll be interesting.
We've really dwelled on that one. That's definitely captured our imagination. So maybe it is capturing the imagination. Right then, last story. So Kick founders have just built their own Patreon inside their own company. So they're launching their own in-app Patreon. But it'd be interesting to see if it's going to be enough to take creators away from Twitch. And they've been doing this for a number of years, right? So the Kick co-founders, Bijan Tehrani and Ed Craven, have launched Club, a standalone superfan platform. They're bundling subscriptions, tipping, pay-world content, and a proprietary in-app currency club. It adds new communities and a social layer to an official launch. And this is following on from an earlier beta that they did earlier this year. It's been built by the founders, like we said, who already run Kick. So they've got a bit of experience around this. Who benefits from this? Is this fans, the creators, Kick, or all of the above?
I mean, I think they're just essentially creating a competitor to Patreon, but you've also seen like Substack start to add in like memberships.
Yeah.
So I get, and then obviously you've got things like OnlyFans, which has that element to it, but then is kind of tarnished at the same time in terms of the brand. You see some athletes that have launched on there, even if they're only creating athletic focused content, because the brand is also associated with adult content, it kind of doesn't necessarily come across right. So there probably is space for other platforms, and I guess they're basically leveraging the fact they already have access to a lot of creators through Kick. They're probably hoping we can convert like a number of the top streamers on Kick to use our platform instead of Patreon or instead of whatever else might be out there from a sort of membership base. But like, you know, I think Substack's a good example of how this works, right? Like you've seen a number of journalists leave publications and become independent and earn like pretty substantial amounts of money with people paying them a monthly subscription. So essentially you're just democratizing that, but giving people more options of where to do it. So I would say it doesn't necessarily impact Twitch, because I think you'll probably still have content on Twitch.
Yeah.
But there'll just be a monetization layer. So I think the main losers from this will be if people are convinced to drop Patreon instead, use this platform instead. And I would be curious to see if YouTube ever ends up with a sort of membership platform. I guess you can have paid subscriptions on certain channels, right? But like, maybe this is just I don't know. It feels like an evolution of the fact that there's just a lot of creators now that have these kind of paid communities or.
Well, it's interesting as well, because obviously they've got this club cash, right, which I think is probably one of the main points of this story as well. So they've got this closed currency, which means that money never really leaves the building, so they're going to hold the float. So, I don't know if you'd like me, you've got a Starbucks account. You know, I remember reading once that Starbucks is one of the biggest holders of cash anywhere in the world. And similarly, this cash that's being generated, this currency, it sits within Kick, right? And ultimately, and all the benefits that holding all of that cash actually means. And it means also that if a creator builds up a big enough holding there, they're almost disincentivized to actually leave, because ultimately all that cash is there and they can't take it anywhere. Whereas Patreon runs on neutrality, which is why creators trust it. So it'd be interesting to see if actually people do think to themselves, I'm going to stay here knowing that I can't take that. Yeah, they might have better economics, but they're going to have less freedom when things change. And as we know, the wheels keep on turning, the world's always changing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other bit to this is like, as well as being the co-founders of Kick, they also own Stake.com, right? Which is the crypto.
Yeah, that's right.
So I would be curious whether there's some sort of flywheel between the three platforms, right? If you've got Kick, you've got Club, which is the name of this platform, and then you've got Stake.com. Are you trying to drive spending across all those platforms or not? I haven't read enough about this to know whether that's something that's in the works or whether this is purely out on its own. But I do agree with you. I think by creating that like club points rather than it be just cash, it does probably create a certain level of stickiness to the platform, because there's an element of needing to convert it back out of those, back out of whatever that currency is, right? That probably leans on the fact that they already have a pretty good understanding of fintech, based on the fact that they built, one of the biggest crypto platforms in the world.
You would think so. Cool. Thanks, Andy. That's our time is up. I've been Ed Abbas. It's been Andy Mars, and we've been the Attention Shift podcast. As ever, like and subscribe, and we'll be back next week.
Cool. Good to see you, mate.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more videos just like this. And make sure you smash that bell icon too, so you're always the first to know exactly when a new episode drops.